The 60s was a great time, wasn't it? We got the Beatles, civil rights for African Americans, the counterculture movement, the New Left, the Vietnam War, George Wallace, the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and RFK. Flipper? I mean, who wouldn't want to live in the 60s? 1968, of course, had the addition of being an election year, and there was a lot of fracturing within the Democratic Party and which candidate they should nominate. The field had narrowed down to Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy, who was running a progressive anti-war candidacy, South Dakota Senator George McGovern, who entered the race 2 weeks before the convention to give senators who supported Bobby Kennedy, a candidate that was anti-Eugene McCarthy, and Vice President Hubert Humphrey, who was running pretty much as LBJ's replacement. The younger people who made up the Democratic base were anti-war, so they backed McCarthy. The Democratic establishment backed Hubert Humphrey, and there was a sort of mix of the bunch that tried to shift McGovern. This divide was exemplified in the Democratic National Convention, when a lot of counterculture groups indicated that they would protest the DNC's complacency to the Vietnam War. The biggest of these groups being the Youth International Party, or Yippies as people called them. Other groups in attendance were the National Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, Women's Strike for Peace, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In fact, Yippies decided to choose their own leader to be the Yippie candidate at the convention. Oh, no, not Abby Hoffman. I meant their true leader, Pegasus. What, you think pigs can't be political leaders? Haven't you read Animal Farm? There were reportedly 10,000 protesters in attendance compared to the 23,000 police and National Guardsmen that were ordered there by Chicago Mayor Richard J. Daley. Daley responded this way in order to show off his accomplishments to the National Democrats and the media, basically saying, "Look, see, I'm taking charge during all this big hassles." Spoiler alert, it didn't really help him. The protests were held from August 23rd to the 28th, while the convention was held from August 24th to the 29th. In fact, the first instance of violence there was reported when 17-year-old Native American hippie Dean Johnson was stopped by police officers for violating the city curfew. Johnson then pulled out a pistol and misfired, which led to him being shot 3 times. That only angered protesters even more. There were threats of them throwing nails into the streets, using cars to block important buildings, and even dumping LSD to the local water supply. Though none of these threats ended up actually happening. What did end up happening was them enacting a form of random street theater that didn't really affect the decisions made at the convention, which would attract the attention of the American public and would sort of send a message that Americans didn't really have any control over their political process. Though the protests were peaceful, the police frequently clashed with the protesters, injuring 101 civilians during the week of the convention. The violence wasn't even just outside of the convention. Inside of the convention, CBS correspondent Dan Rather was manhandled by police while trying to interview a Georgia delegate, and writer Terry Southern described the convention hall as, quote, "exactly like approaching a military installation, barbed wire, checkpoints, the whole bit." While other convention goers decried the actions of the police while making their speeches, the protests culminated in the arrest and trial of 8 protesters: Abby Hoffman, Jerry Rubin, David Dellinger, Tom Hayden, Rennie Davis, John Freunds, Lee Weiner, Bobby Seale, as well as their leader, Pegasus. Though Seale's trial was later severed from the rest, and Pegasus wasn't human, the people tried were called the Chicago 7. Despite all this, the convention just proceeded as planned. Like I said before, 3 people were actively seeking the nomination going into the convention. However, 3 more names ended up making the rounds at the convention. First was an effort to draft Ted Kennedy for the nomination, as none of the 3 remaining candidates were seen as a uniter of the party, whereas Kennedy could sort of be seen as a uniter of all of the factions. But Ted didn't really want to run because he felt that he wasn't ready to take the handle yet, And he was pretty much like, look, you're just trying to get me to stand in for my brother, and I don't want to build my whole career on being a Kennedy. Ironic. Second was Governor of North Carolina, Daniel Moore. While he did not actively seek the nomination, many Southern Democrats really wanted him to be the nominee, minus the Southern Democrats that were really active in someone's third-party bid, but that's not here or there. And the last and more interesting candidate is minister and activist Channing E. Phillips. You see, Phillips was in charge of the D.C. delegation at the convention, which was pledged to vote for Bobby Kennedy. But after Kennedy's assassination, the D.C. delegation decided to have Phillips stand in as a favorite son candidate in an attempt to show, quote, "The Negro vote must not be taken for granted." This made Phillips the first African American to have officially stood as a candidate in the presidential election. Inevitably, the delegates were divided up as such. Ted Kennedy got 12.75 delegates, Moore got 17.5 delegates, Phillips got 67.5 delegates, McGovern got 146.5 delegates, McCarthy got 601 delegates, and Humphrey got 1,759.25 delegates. The vice presidential contest was also interesting. Civil rights activist and Georgia State House member Julian Bond initiated a run to sort of stand as an anti-Vietnam War compromise person against Humphrey's chosen running mate, Senator Edmund Muskie, which ultimately led to only 48.5 delegates actually supporting Bond. Now, many people really decried this unfair process, as McCarthy won the most primaries, yet he was being denied the nomination, and Humphrey, who did not even actively participate in the primaries, is going to be the nominee. Many people actually tried to pressure McCarthy to run a fourth party bid, mimicking another person who was a former Democrat that was actively leaving to form a new political party, but McCarthy declined to do so, though that didn't stop people from trying to write him in anyways. Though it was after this and their blowout in the general election that compelled DNC chair at the time, Fred Harris, to select George McGovern to create a commission on party structure and delegate selection, also known as the McGovern-Fraser Commission, to make the convention process fairer and actually reflect the primary process. The reforms were so big, they literally got delegates to be elected, and they had to reflect the primaries, and they even made it so that the primaries had to be held in every state rather than just ones who felt like it. They actually made the Democratic primaries democratic. The 80s is going to change that, but that's a little bit ahead of ourselves. But I know there's one thing that you have just been having in your mind the entire video. Whatever happened to Yippee candidate Pegasus? While there was speculation that a police officer ate him, it was reported that Pegasus, as well as a sow and a piglet, were transported to the Anti-Cruelty Society. A happy ending. So yeah, that's the story of the most interesting presidential nomination convention in U.S. history. Though to be fair, some conventions have tried to top it, but not as much. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or join my Discord, or check out my articles on the Independent Political Report.